So the point being that the situation in Mecca remained status quo. It didn't change at all. And the Quraysh continued to persecute the Muslims. And so the initial batch that had immigrated from Abyssinia came together and decided, what do we do now? And the bulk of them said, let's go back. It was a mistake to come back. Now let us go back. But in the meantime, they had stayed in Mecca 2-3 weeks. And the news spread amongst all of the Muslims about how good life was in Abyssinia, at least in terms of physical harm. Yes, it was difficult culturally and language and climate, but not hostile. And in the end of the day, if you're living, as we said, the two best blessings that Allah gives, الَّذِي أَطْعَمَهُم مِّن جُوعٍ وَأَمَنَهُم مِّن خَوْفٍ, right? These are the biggest blessings that Allah gives after Iman. And they had that in Abyssinia. They had food and they had safety. These are the best blessings. And so when they heard this, a large percentage of Muslims, we don't know how many Muslims were in Mecca at the time, there were no census, but it is probably correct to say that at least 30-40% of the Muslims of Mecca, if not 50%, decided to immigrate. Now that's a huge number, right? Yani half of your people are now leaving. Half of the Muslims are leaving. It's a huge number. And so, it is as if, and this is my opinion and Allah knows best, the wisdom why Allah allowed these early Muslims to come back only to return was so that the bulk of the Muslims, or a large group of Muslims, would then be convinced to travel to Abyssinia. Because as we all know, the number one way to be convinced is what? Word of mouth. It's the number one way to actually be convinced. My friend told me, right? That's the number one way. And there was no other way that so many Muslims would have emigrated to Abyssinia. No way. Unless Allah allowed the very Muslims who benefited to come back, tell the people status quo, and then people were convinced. And so, for the second immigration, more than 80 Muslims emigrated. That's more than quadruple the number that went the fourth time. More than 80 Muslims migrated, and this time they were headed by Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the direct, obviously, cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, please note though, of that initial batch of 17, not all of them returned in the 80. 17 went and came back. Some of those decided to remain. The most famous person who remained, Uthman ibn Affan. Uthman ibn Affan decided to remain, and he then immigrated to Medina. He participated in Badr and Uhud and all of the rest of the battles. So Uthman ibn Affan did not go back the second time, right? Of course, Abu Salama, Salama went back, and Abu Salama then passed away over there. Other Sahaba that did not go back, it is said that Mus'ab ibn Umair, the famous Mus'ab ibn Umair, who was the first to immigrate to Medina, right, the first person who the Prophet sent to Medina, because his own parents had tortured him the worst torture, his own mother and father. So the Prophet first sent him to Abyssinia. Then when he came back, he decided that he wanted to stay with the Prophet. So he stayed with the Prophet, but then within 3 years, before the immigration that he himself did, the Prophet, he sent Mus'ab. As soon as the first batch of Muslims accepted Islam, the Prophet said to Mus'ab, go to Medina and you can live there. So Mus'ab also did not return to Abyssinia. Other Sahaba as well, some of them returned, some of them didn't.